Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Benson Theater. My name is Lauren Medici. I'm the Director of Engagement Programs at Opera Omaha, and I'm so happy to welcome you to our last Opera in Conversation for this fabulous season. Tonight we will be talking about The Marriage of Figaro. If this is your first Opera in Conversation, just a little bit about how tonight will go. So soon I will leave the stage and turn it over to our wonderful panel of speakers. Tonight is You're Here and Here Live. We're also live streaming on YouTube. So when we get to the time for audience questions, which this is Opera in Conversation because it's a conversation, not a lecture, so audience questions are encouraged. I will be running through the theater with a microphone. Please wait till I get to you with the microphone to ask your question so we can make sure that everybody in this interview for the live stream. This is our last Opera in Conversation for the season. Here at the on Sunday, May 7th for our annual Poetry and Music Project concert before. We invite Nebraska and Iowa students to submit poems. Two composers who are alumni of the American Opera Project's Composers in the Voice Project select from those poems. This year they selected 15 to set to music to create original songs that will be performed and premiered here at that concert on May 7th. So I hope you'll join us back at the Benson Theater for that on May 7th. And now, back to talking about The Marriage of Figaro. As I said, this is a conversation, so we absolutely encourage your questions, and we want to hear your thoughts and experience from the opera as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to tonight's moderator, Sarah Lynn Brown, who is a theater artist and educator, and for the last few months has been with us at Opera Omaha doing some engagement dramaturgy, which has been just fabulous. So we're so welcome. We're so glad to have her here, and we're so excited for this panel. So take it away, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful night. Yeah. It'll still be beautiful when you get out, I promise. Again, my name is Sarah Lynn Brown. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am so excited to be facilitating and moderating this brilliant conversation. Lauren so smartly has a little bit of speaker prep, so we all kind of get together. Before this, we sat down in the beautiful green room, and we kind of chatted through about what we wanted to talk about, which took a few minutes. And then these glorious humans started to speak about who they are and what they do, and my jaw was on the floor. I was like, I get to talk with you? This is amazing. So typically, you all have sheets that have bios on them, and typically I would read some of those beautiful things in the bios and encourage you to read more. But in our introductions of one another, they spoke about themselves so beautifully. I was like, can you all do your own introductions? Because I want this audience to hear it in your own voices. So that is going to be how we start off today. May you give your name, your pronouns, and the beautiful things in your background that you would like these folks to know about.
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Raydell Cordell III, and I am a local professional actor and elementary teacher. I'm an art teacher at Loveland Elementary and Westgate Elementary, which is part of the Westside School District. I've been employed in Westside for 15 years now. 6 years ago, I started a theater program, which is thriving now, and we are having a phenomenal time teaching important life skills to elementary students, grades 3rd through 6th. I'm also work professionally in Omaha Community Playhouse, Blue Barn Theater, Nebraska Shakespeare, The Rose, and as a freelance teaching artist throughout the community here in Omaha.
Hello, my name is Rowena Bennett. I use she, they pronouns. I am a local artist, recent author, and advocate. Speaking of being an author, I have been working on the characters for over 10 years and spent the last 2 years publishing this book. I wrote, illustrated, and self-published it. It's a queer-focused, diverse world of characters, and so that's a moment I'm really proud of. As an artist, I have an art studio down at the Hot Shops, which I'm very grateful for, to have a space to work and play in, and also have a shop which I design queer-focused to create representation for queer folks. I say it's Pride Month every month inside my shop. It has a lovely rainbow mural that I painted inside that when people come in, they can take a photo with the mural and celebrate some happiness and joy in the space. So if you ever come to the hot shops, come visit me on the 3rd floor.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. So I have some questions kind of down. If you all have any questions that are like, ask them immediately. Just make sure that for our live feed. Otherwise, off to you all, and you can ask any questions to this lovely panel. So the first question I have is, are you sitting on a panel for a production of Opera Omaha and or relationship with this medium?
Well, first, let me apologize. I forgot to so he, him.
Thank
so
you.
Thank you.
You.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm on this panel because I actually come from background here, and I'm not too familiar with. I've only seen a handful of operas, so I think I was invited just because of my perspective of not being fully knowledgeable and aware of different operas. So I was invited to come along and just to speak of my experience from watching the production, which I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you.
This was my first live opera that I've seen, so it was very exciting. Very cool. Yeah, I just love the music. Actually, Lauren came into my studio one day while I was painting that rainbow mural and to ask me about following up to do this, and I was playing my opera music while I was painting my mural. And so I was like, you see, this is, I really need to do this because I love the opera. You see it in the moment. So this was just a very exciting thing for me to be able to go in, and usually I just listen to the music and I just feel it, and it helps me with my art and staying calm. And so the experience of actually seeing and actually understanding what was being said was really fun.
Is there a particular opera or composer that you find you listen to?
No, I have this playlist on my Spotify with just a whole list of people that I listen to. I have a master violinist next to me in the studio at Hot Shops, and whenever I put my list on, he's like, turn it up.
Yes, that's good. That's good. Yeah, Spotify, they'll help you out. I love it.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so you both saw the production of Marriage of Figaro. What were your expectations? And this production of Marriage of Figaro, what surprised you, or what kind of met your expectations?
So again, my opera experience is very limited. I haven't seen a whole lot of operas. I have seen the Malcolm X opera last fall, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I remember growing up in the early 2000s, MTV did like a rendition of Carmen. It was called Carmen, a hip opera.
What?
that had
That's
Beyonce.
Amazing.
Yeah, Beyonce played Carmen. So and I was familiar with the music from that.
Yeah, I love that.
So with that being said, I did have my reservations at first coming in because I was like, oh, it's the opera. It's going to be long, and I don't have the attention span for it, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to follow along. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I felt the Marriage of Figaro was very accessible to me as an individual because of the characters, the costumes, all the technical elements.
It feels a little Shakespearean.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. And what it is, I realized, oh, this is very similar to a lot of Shakespeare comedies. So to me, with my classical training in Shakespeare, I was able to make that connection and follow the story with ease. Like I was like, wow, I understand what's going on, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So when I came in little, like I said, my reservations, I was kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. But then towards the end, I was like, oh, what? It's already 3 hours? I was following along. So yeah.
For me, I fell in love with opera at a pretty young age. A partner of my aunt's used to listen to classical music, and it just spoke to me. Like I said, this was the first time I actually understood what was being said because of the captions. Usually I just listen to the music, and I just love how the opera moves me. It just, like, I would imagine that I could reach the notes that were being reached, which I can't. And it just introduced me to a world, something that like growing up in a small Caribbean country, we don't get a lot of exposure to, and it just gave me this release and this world that I could imagine, like especially like not anything I could imagine something inside my head, and so when I went, any expectations, I was like, I'm just going to go in and listen and just joy that I get from listening to the opera on my Spotify. I was like, I just couldn't. I was just like, oh my gosh, and I couldn't imagine that, like seeing it could be fun and that I could get more, and it was just amazing, and the characters and their expressions, like I wasn't just singing, it was performance, like magic, and I just
Can I add to
Please
that?
do.
It was so engaging, like from the beginning of the opera, from the start of it. So I think a lot of that goes with the direction, because I love how the opera started, kind of like that introduction and kind of like the stylized, the movement, and really establishing this is the scenery, this is the set, these are the servants, these are the class, like are the lords, or are the counts. So it was cool to be able to see that play out at the very beginning of the opera, and then just throughout the characterizations of the character. So Marcelina,
Yeah.
like when she came out and broke that fourth wall, and like to me, I was like, oh great, she's inviting us in, and I'm able to like have a connection with her because of what she's trying to do, like the subplot of the story. So yeah, the actors are opera singers. I don't know how to identify professional opera
Artists.
artists. Fully embracing their characters to tell the story really helped. So it became really engaging. Like, I agree completely with what you said. So.
and the set was
Oh, yeah.
amazing. From the
Yes.
opening,
Yeah.
everything to me was just just amazing, and the simplicity and the complicatedness of the set as well, like the intricacy of it, and that it was so simple, and the ways, and just spinning it around, moving it around the stage with the same set, and it totally completely changed it. Like, I just loved it.
Yeah, and just like the size of it, like it was like so oppressive in a way. Like it was beautiful, but also constant reminder of where they are and like what that kind of environment can do to a situation.
Yeah. It was like the details of it, like I'm assuming it was like a tree, like a giant. That's what I got from it. And even at a point I was like, is it like a family tree? Like, are those supposed to be like pictures and whatnot? But this way it moved, but then in the fourth act, when they were at the garden and how it was displayed, I thought that was just beautiful.
Yeah.
The set was just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Raydell, you mentioned, no, it's great. You mentioned a little bit about how that, the movement, the stylized movement in the overture reminded you a little bit of like, set up the world, the environment, specifically some of the class, like here's the servants, here's the count and the countess, like we're getting to know a little bit about the class. Yes. So Marriage of Figaro, in its day, in the 18th century, was challenging some of the socioeconomical class structures that was happening. And they did it in a very delicate way. Both Mozart and the librettist were very careful about pushing the envelope but not pushing it too much, and kind of the comment of class back in the 18th century, and now we're doing it in 2023. So what were your thoughts about what was happening in the show, how that kind of mirrored our sort of socioeconomic class, what we have grown from, and what challenges we still have? There was like 12 questions, so.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I would say ultimately, my first impression was, okay, so the narrative here, you have an individual who's in power, so you have a person who's in power, and how they're abusing their power to pretty much not fall in love, but to have a relationship with a servant, Susanna, right? So you have the Count, who is trying to assault. Well, who does assault. And to me, that was a problem, just because it's like, okay, yeah, a person in power is abusing their power. However, with the whole subplots with the Countess and trying to get back on the Count, and then it was just kind of like, oh, I've heard of this storyline before. You know, again, we read it and seen it in Shakespeare a lot, you know. So ultimately, it was just the idea that what people in power can do to those who are not in power, but then also those who are not in power trying to overcome that. So as Figaro, as Susanna explained to Figaro that, yeah, the Count is, you know, hitting on me, or, you know, trying to get with me. Seeing Figaro like take initiative, like, okay, well, let's stop this, you know. Yeah. So let's figure out a plan to get back to the Count and whatnot. So those who are who has less power trying to, do something about it. Outsmart.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I definitely love the outsmarting part.
Yeah.
And that even though there may be things in power right now in Nebraska, we have decisions that are being made for us, certain bills that are being passed, there's still that aspect of hope, and that even though things are being filtered down to you and you feel you don't have that power, that there's still something that you can do, and that change won't happen sometimes exactly when you want it to happen. But if you believe in the power of love and you believe in yourself, like you build a community and communicate with each other, then the world is open enough for you to create your own reality. And I love that. I got that from that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And like the community communicating, and you know, sometimes our situation makes for strange bedfellows. So the fact that like Susanna and the Countess are working together when the Countess could want nothing to do with her, but like being able to allow the power position that the Count has over both of them to unite them. Yeah. I think that's really beautiful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I like it too that power doesn't necessarily always mean that you're the smartest.
No.
No. Yes, for sure. Okay, so the next question I have is about the ending of the production. And Raydell, having experience with Shakespeare, you will know that there are some complicated endings in that canon as well. And so the ending of this opera, what were your thoughts about the ending? How did the conclusion of forgiveness, of redemption, how did that resonate with you? Do you feel like it was earned? Do you think that Mozart handled the music around that forgiveness well? And a little bit about the fact that it's a comedy. Does that help kind of facilitate a little bit of the complicated nature of the resolution?
Yeah, I mean, I accepted it. Like,
Great.
No, I didn't like it, but I accepted it because that was expected.
Yeah.
You know, again, it goes into the whole like, oh, everything is fine now, right? We had some fun. We had mistaken identities, and you know, we all had these plots and these schemes that we're doing to each other. But ultimately, everything is fine because you know, Figaro and Susanna were able to together. The Count and Countess were able to amend and be okay. I personally did not like the Count, and I did not want the Countess to get back with the Count, you know, especially after he was assaulting Susanna in the woods.
Yes.
So.
And what he did to the cat. Was anyone else really upset about the cat?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. but you know.
But still.
Right. So with that being said, I was just kind of like, Countess, no, don't get back with them. So, but ultimately the style,
Yeah.
right, the structure of the opera, it makes total sense and to end in a celebration. But I did like I don't know if this was a director choice or if this was an artist choice, but I did like how the Countess rejected the kiss. Like from the Count, and so I was like, okay, at least there's something there
Yes,
to show.
we're going to talk about this later.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah.
Yeah.
I accepted the end. I'm all about forgiveness, and I feel like people act or they will act based on their past hurt and experiences, and you never know what's going in someone's brains and how perspective can play such a huge thing. I mean, Susanna, who wanted to marry Figaro, and Figaro thought that, she was being, mischievous and with how she was behaving. But so from his perspective, I could see how that was. But then she's empowering herself and taking things into her own hand, even bringing the pouch full of money to make sure that everything was set. And so it's like she had her plan and she was doing what she was doing to save the marriage and to be with the love of her life. And the perspective from Figaro, at certain points he was like, well, what's happening? What's happening here? And so from that perspective and understanding that there's always 1,000 sides, more than two to me, to a story, and maybe thinking a little bit deeper about where that person is coming from might bring you to, understand how forgiveness. I loved that it was done with comedy. Yeah. Just in myself of the children's book that I wrote, and I wanted to make sure that people did not feel like confronted by it. And you can teach through humor, and I love that it was done because we paid attention. You said you were engaged. Yep. You watched it. I did not know that 3 hours had went by, during the intermission. I was like, okay, when is it gonna start back up, And so, it was, I accepted it, and I love the human nature that was brought out within the play.
Yeah, and particularly this production, some of the research that I did, a lot of this play is based on like commedia dell'arte tropes, and the fact that I think this particular production and how we are starting to or have been presenting live storytelling for the past century or so, is that realistic nature? Is that humanity? Like this could have been some pretty silly stock characters, big comedy, which it was, but also this production allowed for some really human moments and some really like vulnerable and intimate moments that I think the comedy just like sets you up for this like really beautiful kind of human connection that I think this production did really well.
I think that's important to have, especially in the production. Back, but over the top and very, because that's a style. But now, since we've progressed so much since the 1700s, we gotta add that human element to the story, So that's why I said like I accepted the ending, I accepted like the whole opera because it was engaging. But the fact that we have those human elements really made it work. If you didn't have that, then it would have been like, okay, well, another.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Expected.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about that?
No.
Okay, cool. So this next question is about the role of Cherubino, so the pants role, which again, not a stranger to that in Shakespeare. The entire company was an all-male company and playing both male and female roles. In looking at this particular role, especially thinking about like some of the legislation that's currently happening, kind of jarring for me as I was watching it. I was like, oh, if certain legislation passes, this production would not be legal. A lot of Shakespeare would not be legal, not to mention all the other beautiful work that is happening in Omaha that would not be available. What are your thoughts about the importance of a pants role like Carabino in the 18th century, but also how important that work is in opera, in Shakespeare, in performance, in theater as an experience for an audience?
Thank you, because this is a hot topic right now, and it's one of those things where, like, especially when we talk about classical works and classical theaters, we need to have these characters, I mean, really played by whomever, you know, and I felt the individual who played Carabino, I thought she did a phenomenal job in the role. And it was just one of those moments where, you know, I have no idea what the casting process is like for these operas and what things they look for. To me, that individual was phenomenal and played it well throughout. So with that being said, I feel like we should not put so much stress like, oh, well, we can't have, you know, drag, you know, we cannot have that. And it's like, no, we're telling a story here. And this individual was able to bring this character to life. In fact, it was my favorite character because I thoroughly enjoyed watching him on stage, or her on stage, throughout the whole entire performance. So really, it's just what serves the story, you know? And for a role like that, you need an individual who can just play almost like that young love, like, you know, and wherever that means, you know, whatever it means, it is what it is. But I just thoroughly enjoyed it, and it is a shame to know that, you know, if that does pass, then we won't have opportunities to witness classical stories, classical tales, because we always have that when it comes to mistaken identities and whatnot. So.
Yeah.
I guess that brings me to the thing I said earlier about power not necessarily being giving the person the smarts to deal with things. And now we have, if these certain bands, make it through, we won't be able to see these works. And the reasoning is completely unfounded. Like, I don't see what reasons you can say of harm there is, for not being able to have these kind of performances, not being able to have a drag show, not being able to create art, muffling the voices of artists. It just does not make any sense to me. And just to see that this play written how long ago, that this very same thing exists today. And we introduce ourselves using pronouns, and to understand that these pronouns that are being used that people think as new, it's not new. They existed back when this play was written. All of these things existed, and it's like we're just on this loop of, having this power and wanting to filter down and wanting to hold on to that power, and not understanding that everybody deserves an equal chance to be who they are and to be able to be their most authentic self. And taking that away from another human, it's not right. We saw that within the play, trying to assault Susanna, trying to prevent a marriage. It's when people are in power and they try to dictate your life and take away your rights, it's just unfair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Great.
Yes, please.
And not only talking about gender performance, with that character, we also, I believe that individual is part of the BIPOC community. So you have a person of color who's also playing like you said, a pant role of the show, So it just goes back to, as a performer, just as long as you embrace your authentic self and bring what you can to the table, you can start the story, you can tell the story. We shouldn't have our blinders on and say, oh, well, this is this is all about gender performance, or, but it's about the story.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Okay, my next question is about some of the closer relationships in this opera that weren't ones that were romantic. The one that struck me the most was the relationship between the Countess and Susanna. And I would love to know a little bit more about the impact of that relationship or other kind of like camaraderie relationships that were explored in this opera.
Yeah,
Maybe something that struck you.
Yeah, I really love the relationship between Susanna and the Countess. Like, you know, traditionally, when I would go watch a piece of classical theater, you know, I admit I kind of get turned off by the typical ingenue, like the young lovers and
Sure.
whatnot.
They're boring.
I was just about to say, I find
they're
them boring,
boring.
you know, and the start of her scene when she's in her, you know, room and woe is me, I'm just kind of like, okay, all right, come on. But then just seeing the connection and the Countess, I was just like, great. So there are these two women who are working together, you know, who are outsmarting, you know, the men in the opera. I love watching that, you know, and just them having a great time. Also, you know, just the relationship between Susanna and Marcelina, right? And just seeing the dynamics between the two of them was just fun to watch. Now, granted, they weren't getting along,
Yes.
but it was just fun to see that relationship on the stage. But yeah, I agree with you. The Countess and Susanna was great to witness and observe.
Yeah, it was great. I also loved the Caribano
Yes.
and Susanna, like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
you know, that
Yeah.
the way that they got together, and it just seemed really like, you know, you could see them hanging out and just, you know, that's
You could
buddies.
tell like their friendship went back a long way.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, I really enjoyed seeing that friendship together, and especially, you know, when they came in the room and, you know, the character had to hide, and, you know, because you couldn't be, you know, together in a room because it's a male and a
Yes,
female, and you're like, you couldn't do that, but they still had that really, like, to me, looked like a very genuine friendship and trusted each other. I mean, Caribano was reading out the love, you know, the poem, and look, and I'm sharing my heart with you, you know,
Vulnerability,
yes,
yes.
vulnerability, like just, it was lovely to see that, and also the way, you know, the Countess almost like, they had, to me, sometimes you could see her kind of let Susanna take the lead, and other times you would see her like, you know, she's like, I got your back. Like, you do this and I got you, you know. I really enjoyed that.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Maybe have time for one more question, and then we'll open it up and see if you all have any questions for this panel. So, Raydell, you noted the Carabino was played by a BIPOC artist.
Yep.
The diversity in this cast, I just would like to know your thoughts in and around it. I know from what I know of Opera Omaha, that has been something that has been important in their mission for representation on their stages, and thinking about opera and its history. That is something that I know a lot of opera companies and classical companies are putting at the forefront. What are your thoughts around it? Like in watching this opera, was there anything that struck you, anything that surprised you, anything delighted you, anything you had questions about?
Yeah, well, you know, just hands down, my initial thought was, you know, the marketing, when I'm like, oh, Figaro is the black man? Cool. Like, you know, like I get that instant reaction, not knowing about the plot of the show. So I just knew that, oh, the title character is black. Well, that's awesome. But then going to the show, and I was like, oh, he's a servant, and he's black. And I was like, but then just watching, being engaged in the show is just one of those things I'm just kind of like, well, again, I'm fully engaged on what's happening and I'm following the story. And as an artist of color, it's nice to see other artists of color doing opera, right? Like being, like just doing the job, you know? And so that's when I just felt like, oh, well, this is a great thing. Especially after coming back watching Malcolm X last fall. You know, again, I'm not I'm not really experienced in the opera community and you know what the different ethnical all the different racial backgrounds. So I don't know what that looks like when it comes to casting and working. But just seeing more artists of color doing opera, I definitely was appreciative to see that and to experience that, and hoping to see more of that, because it made the opera just more accessible to me, you know, because there were moments that Figaro had where I'm like, yes, that is a black man's reaction. You know, like the whole moment when he realized Marcelina and Bartolo was his parents.
Yeah.
You know, it just some of his side eye that he was giving, and I was kind of like, yes, I know exactly what you're feeling right now. So really, it just made it more accessible, and that's one thing I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Yes, accessibility and representation does matter.
Yes.
I really enjoyed seeing that. And whenever I see things like that, and people, for example, certain movies have come out, and you know we've heard of Ariel, and the reaction to that, and it's like, people, do you know this is make-believe? This is make-believe,
Right.
okay? This is something someone has written. And so if someone can play a certain role in there, let them play the role. It is make-believe, you know? And so that's always been funny to me. And it was nice, like, and even with me, you know, like for a second I was like, oh, how would Figaro is black and he has 2 white parents? But I was like, it's not that. It is, the character is being played in there, and that is it. You know, it's just a character, and why should people, obviously I honor everybody's feelings and I leave it where they are. It's not for me to take on, but it just makes me question, why is it such a big deal? Like, this is something, and just creating that accessibility, I can, you know, if I wanted to sing opera and I go in and I see that there's, you know, a black man on stage, I'm like, it's possible. People don't understand the power of representation, the growth that can happen, the seeds of change that can grow by having that representation and seeing what could be, what's possible, what I can create, we have a lot of limitations that we put on ourselves, negative self-talk, all these things. And so having that representation, seeing that someone can do this, enjoying the show, being engaged, and me wanting to now go back home and play the entire thing and listen to it, I mean, that's what art is about. It's about to inspire happiness, to inspire joy, and to create change and to better our society.
Well said. Yes. All right. Do you all, I can't, there you are. Oh, thank you. Do you all have any questions about anything that we've been discussing up here, anything that you would like to deep dive into about opera, about Marriage of Figaro, about these brilliant humans? Yeah.
Hi. So I wanted to talk about something that I found different, that surprised me, and that worried me in dress rehearsal. I had to go talk to some other people about this, and that was when they allowed Susanna to slap her husband. Now, I didn't mind, like when she's slapping him, kind of at the slap, and it really bothered me that we did that with the audience.
Yeah.
That was the only part of the direction that I wish Dean had not done. And so I would just like a comment about, other people told me they never even noticed it, or it went right over their head.
Yeah.
But it hit me, and I had trouble getting back into the performance for a few minutes after that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing up that moment. I think that, I think you're right. I think a lot of times, you know, domestic violence from a male identifying to a female identifying human means one thing. Like if that would happen vice versa, in the production, we would have had a lot to say about it. But female identifying to male identifying violence isn't something that strikes us in the same way, which is perhaps why it was not seen as an issue. But I'm really glad that you brought it up, because it is something that is still violence that is happening from one partner to another. It's something that's happening in public, and so it's something to provide conversation. Whether that was the intention of the director or not, I'm not sure. If it was like, we should do this because this is a little pushing the boundary and I want to be able to talk about it, or not. But thank you for bringing it up, because I would love to know your all thoughts about when you witnessed the moment and kind of thinking about it in hindsight now.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, and thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, I agree. I think when that happens, we need to have a conversation about it. You know, I'll definitely say part of me makes me wonder, like, okay, so when that happened, is it because of their relationship? Because they have that fun, loving, banter relationship? You know, like, is that, has she done that before? You know, that's something I wonder. But the thing is that this is what I saw. This is the production. That's the moment I saw. So with that being said, when that happened, it was kind of like, yeah, it was a little like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. You know, so yeah, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't think nothing more after that. But as an educator, especially if you're at the dress rehearsal with a room full of youth, of students, you know, that is something where we need to address and have that conversation. So that's why when it comes to doing art, it gives individuals an opportunity to be vulnerable and have those discussions that can typically make us uncomfortable, you know. So I think that's why it's important to have that and to be able to follow up with a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that question. I did remember seeing it, and it didn't last too long because didn't want to overanalyze everything in there, but it did make an impression on me. And I agree with you. It's about, for me, now you've brought this up as a question, and now we're talking about this. It's about communicating. Like I said earlier, there's 1,000 sides to story. You just mentioned, well, has this been done before? How is it? Like, do they have a safe word for this? You know, like, you know, like, how does it play? But we just saw that very one moment, you know, and so I think for me, what I took from it was pause before I come to any kind of conclusion about anything, and how I respond to that. Being in the queer community myself, and how you can have female identified and female identified together, how does that play? You know, female identified and male identified, how does that play? I've heard stories of how, you know, it plays out and how it can seem unfair. And so now with this art, we can have conversations like we're having right now, and maybe deal with some topics, like you said, that are uncomfortable, or because you're not exposed to it, it's not something that, you know, is in your world, in your visor, it's not something that you're seeing, and now it's brought to the forefront and helps you now move forward in your thinking.
Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. Any other questions? Yeah, in the back. Lauren's getting her steps in.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm curious as to why you think any pending legislation might prohibit in the future performance or an opera like Figaro. That seems to me a bit hyperbolic and a bit of a stretch.
From what I know and from what my perspective and knowledge around it is the cross-dressing, it is the travesti or the pants role that would be the issue in this particular opera. From my perspective, that's what I know.
Yes.
But I could be incorrect, but that is my understanding.
Yes, and the other, we mentioned that it wasn't just this one, but other Shakespearean plays where there is
oh,
that.
yes,
Twelfth
And so we're
Night.
just wondering how that's going to affect, you know, the performance of artists and being able to, you know, now that, you know, how I said I was inspired by seeing a black man in the role in there, how would somebody, you know, who, for example, love Carabano's character and would want to play it, and as a female would not be able to play that if that legislature were
Right,
passed.
right. And it's also outside of classical canon, like a lot of theater works offer opportunities for people to play something that they don't identify as, or to play as they identify, which would be considered not available if that legislation was passed.
Yeah, because Carabino is female identifying actor playing a male identifying role, which then get dressed as a woman
Right.
during the show. So that's where the issue lies.
Yeah, yeah. Do we have a question or a comment down here? Oh, please do, by all means.
So that piece of legislation, the performances could still happen, but you wouldn't be able to have anyone under a certain age. So if they're not 19 or older, actually 21 or older, I believe, they would not be allowed to be in that production. And if they are, that production either cannot happen, or the people putting on that production will be fined $10,000 for even having the production. So that is where the issue comes in, is that you wouldn't be able to do any of that. So like you were saying, Carabino's character, yes, it was played by a woman who dressed as a man. That is also would be an issue. However, if you were to have a male-identifying person playing that character, they would not be allowed to wear that dress within the performance.
So it would be mostly under the age of 21, and so like the student dress that is done, and anyone who's bringing their children would not be able to.
Thank you for that clarification.
Jinx.
And just one more actual fun comment on that to liven it a little bit. One of the recent, I don't know if it was Opera America or one of the magazines that we get, had an article about what if we actually did add more drag to opera. And the one that I remembered was the Queen of the Night, who was also very famous Mozart. What if the Queen of the Night was played by a drag queen?
Yeah, that is something that in my research has been happening with a lot of pants roles, is an opportunity for the trans community to be appropriately represented in productions.
You just might have to rewrite what octave the music's in.
I know, I watched it a few days ago. The Met put on a Rossini opera called Le Comte d'Ory in 2011, and that features 14 men, many bearded, wearing nuns' outfits, and they staged the whole thing as a straight drag show. I mean, they just went there. And the men at the end lifted their habits, and there was red, frilly under things and male boxer shorts, and it got a huge laugh. And it was actually in keeping with the spirit of the opera.
Sure, yeah.
I have one behind me real quick that I want to get to. Thanks.
As people who are newer to the opera genre, but also artists, I'm just wondering, like, one or two things that, you know, experiencing opera that will maybe change the way you do your art in the future, you know, either performances or, you know, what you create at Hot Shops.
For me, I play more opera now. It just brought a different dimension, actually seeing it. And like I said, I would listen to it and it's in a different language, would not really understand what was going on. I was just moved by the music and understanding that there's more layers. I want to see more operas now. I want to see every single one that I can see. And and it's just lovely. And so I am just I'm gonna learn a little bit more instead of just listening to it, you know, find out that there's actually a story within that. It's not just the music, the music moves me, but now there's an actual story. And I've actually been working on a few sketches after I saw the play, and so I'm excited to paint listening to opera.
Yeah. As a theater educator, one of the things I try to teach to my students are the 3 acting tools, which is the voice, the body, and the imagination. And all 3 tools you need to be able to effectively tell a story. And one thing I really got from this production was how the actors or performers, artists, they really use their body to communicate the story. And that's something I specifically remember through my classical theater training, is that especially when dealing with heightened language, you know, it takes a while for audience to like adjust their ear to tune into the language. So you have to make sure that you don't lose them right away. So you really got to activate your imagination in your body. In an opera, something in my experience, those performers are phenomenal because just how trained they are and musically they are. And so they're singing all these gorgeous lyrics and notes, and for them, they also had to make sure that, okay, not everyone are opera fans. Not everyone is used to hearing opera. So how am I able to effectively communicate what my character is experiencing and doing? Well, I got to make sure that I'm using my body. And that's something I really got from this production, is how all the performers were really engaged with their bodies. Like, I seriously forgot for a second that Carabino was in the chair when they were hiding, and, you know, and just, to me, I'm thinking about the discipline to sit in that chair and to, like, you know, commit, you know. So to me, so to answer your question, was just an affirmation that, yes, I can always commit with my body to help tell the story, especially if I'm doing classical training or classical theater, because not everyone has the ear for it, and it takes them a while. But you don't want to lose them right away, right? You want to make sure that they're engaged. So commitment.
Yeah. Did we have one final question? Yeah.
I was wondering if you would say a bit about the juxtaposition of the comic elements with the poignant or tragic. One of the things I love about The Marriage of Figaro is that it does that, and you find yourself touched at moments and then laughing. And how do the two of you, Ms. Bennett and Mr. Cordell, do that in your own art?
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'll definitely say after I left this production, I had that moment when I reflected and was like, wow, this was actually pretty funny. Like, this was a legit comedy. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed it. But it's just one of those things where, you know, it's the idea that you got to have both. You got to have light and dark. You got to have comedy and tragedy. You know, that's why it works. And, you know, the moments where, you know, I felt uncomfortable or did not like, did not connect with, I found myself enjoying the moments that were funny and that were hilarious, and that's what I kind of like leaned into. So really, I guess what comes down to it was nice to have both comedy moments and like darker moments throughout the show, but really it was all about the comedy, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, I enjoyed the contrast.
Yeah.
And as I'll be writing future books, I just finished this one, I taught myself how to write that children's book, which is quite the journey. And so as I move forward, understanding that a little bit of, you know, discomfort is good to allow you to understand the contrast and the opposite, the funny, that you could, without one, there's no light without dark, there's no dark without light. And so understanding the contrast, and that as human beings, we have those two parts in ourselves, it further allowed me to connect. And, you know, having the, you know, like when the slap happened and, you know, having that little moment, and then to the funnier moments and the loving moments between them. And it made me, like I said, I wondered, like even when you said, well, have they done that before? Has that happened before? Like it strikes up something in you where you want to learn more. So I enjoy the contrast of it, and it's going to help me as I create more art, as I write more books, to see the contrast that I saw in the opera and how I can apply it to my own art and creation.
Yeah, I specifically want to talk about, and thank you, yeah, the contrast. In Act 4, like to me, when I say like the dark moment, the part that I really did not connect with was in Act 4 when the Count was assaulting, Susanna, right? Like to me, that made me disconnect right away, But then, a few moments later, when Figaro found out, once he realized that it was Susanna underneath the cloak, and they started having like their fun little, moment, I was all like, I forgot about the assault. Like, so it was one of those things where, having that contrast helped with the production overall, because I was just kind of like, even though it had that moment, there was still a lot more comedy throughout the show, which I was kind of like, okay, again, that's what this is all about. So I accepted it.
Yeah, it was a nice balance.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Thank you both so much. This was such a beautiful conversation. I really appreciate your time and your thoughts and your talent. Any final thoughts you want to add?
I wish this wasn't the end. I'm really excited to see more, and it's the end of this season, so I'm excited to see future operas. And
They got a good season coming
yes,
up. You're
yes.
gonna like it. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
I agree.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Have a
Thank you.
beautiful evening.
And thank you, Sarah, for moderating.
Thank you.
Rowena
Yes.
and Raydell. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.